I know some of you are. Yeah, we're just doing the recording. Yeah, so it's great to see people here today, not only from Leeds. I know some of you have come from other parts of the UK, so fantastic to see you all. I hope today's session is going to give you something that you can take away with you going forward. I'll just introduce, so my name is Andrew William Barnes, and I'm one of the Century Support Officers here at DeafBlind UK. I'm also joined by Mike Wycherley, who's also a regional manager at DeafBlind UK, and Carl Proud from Leeds Leeds Hearing and Sight Loss Service, or BIDS services. Again, I'm just going to quickly go through some housekeeping rules with you again, very similar to what Karen was saying, but just a few add-on. So obviously, please ensure that you're on mute and only unmute yourself when you have a question or wish to make a comment. Please make sure to either raise your electronic hand or your actual hand if you want to say something. If possible, and if you're comfortable to do so, please could you turn your camera on when you say something, just as this will aid with lip reading for members who have a hearing impairment. Thank you. If you would like to raise a question or make any point, again, please just raise your electronic hand. Do feel free to use the chat feature. This is available for everyone. This will be manned during the workshop by myself and Mike at varying points, so we'll be able to pick up on any question and make sure that that is part of the discussion. As Karen said, we've got two BSL interpreters here today, James McVicker and Rachel, and they will be swapping at certain intervals. Okay. I'll just very quickly run through the agenda so we all know sort of what's happening. So we're going to, the next section that we're going to go into will be user feedback and an explanation of the reconnections idea, which will be led by Mike. And then at 1:20, we'll have some observations. We'll be hearing some observation from Carl about face-to-face meetings and the impact of the pandemic. At 1:25, we'll have a quick break for 5 minutes. At 1:30, we will then go into another section with Carl, which is looking at increasing self-confidence. At 1:45, we'll have a break again for 5 minutes. And then at 1:50, we'll have a section led by Mike Wycherley, looking at improving mobility and having a short discussion around that. At 2:05, we'll then have another break. And then at 2:10, we'll come back and I will lead a section on accessible opportunity, which will be a discussion. And then at 2:25 till 2:30, we'll have a quick recap and a thank you for all of you attending. I'm just going to, in a moment, put the contact details for both DeafBlind UK and BIDS services Leeds into the chat, so you've got those contact details and get in touch with us. I will also do this again towards the end so that they're there as a refresher for you. There will also be a follow-up email hopefully sent out to you after the session, containing all of our information as well as some of the key themes mentioned in today's session. So you've heard enough from me for now. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mike Wycherley from DeafBlind UK, who's going to kick off things by providing some context to today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. I'm sure you'll agree that the sensory loss community is incredible. There are lots of remarkable people doing remarkable things every day. It's also, it has to be said, a far larger section of our society than many of us realise. Over the past 18 months or so, many individuals within this community have become cruelly marginalised and isolated. What with shielding and staying at home, finding it hard to get accessible and accurate advice and information, and for some, of course, still very much reliant on touch to help them understand and navigate the world around them. yet terrified in some cases that this actual act of touching itself could potentially prove fatal to them. Organisations such as DeafBlind UK and Leeds Hearing and Sight Loss Service and others have been working tirelessly to rapidly develop the most relevant and vital services to support people through this long and bleak period in lots of practical, technological, and of course psychological ways. Now that things are hopefully, we hope, improving, although we may be suffering a blip in the near future, every one of us nevertheless has the opportunity to play our own part in making sure that the future is better than the recent past for people in our own communities who are trying to re-engage with normal social and productive lives and the activities and the freedoms that they should be able to enjoy. So we're hoping that today's discussion will help you all to think about what you can do individually and what we can all achieve collectively so that this event can have an immediate, useful, lasting legacy. One of our local members here in Leeds, who we've been working with since before the COVID pandemic, recently put the recent times into sharp perspective in something that he said to us. And I'm just going to quote directly from what he actually said to us. He said, "Before becoming part of DeafBlind UK, this is going back a few years, I felt that I was locked in a cupboard with only a chink of light. DeafBlind UK opened the door and let friends and confidence in. I could meet with other people and we chatted about rubbish mostly, but it was finally a conversation I felt included in. Since the pandemic," he says, "that door is closed tightly again." Now, a few months ago, we conducted a survey of over 1,000 people with some level of dual sensory loss, that's sight and hearing loss, in the same person. And I'm sure it will concern you as much as it concerned us to learn that no less than 64% of the people who responded in that survey told us that they'd lost all confidence and motivation to participate in active and social opportunities outside of their own homes. 64%. Some of the quotes we gathered during that survey are quite emotive. One lady, for instance, told us, "I can't tell you how grateful I am for your call today. I won't lie, I'm absolutely terrified." And that was not untypical. The contacts and the feedback that we've had with our community, including many people with sensory loss, their families, their carers, and the professionals that support them, have given us a unique level of understanding of their fears, their concerns, their needs, and also their aspirations for the future. From this feedback, 3 key themes kept reappearing, more than others, when discussing people's feelings about re-engagement with their communities. These 3 key themes were, number 1, that their self-confidence was very low and that they were fearful about being out and about again. Number 2 was that their physical mobility had deteriorated and would need to be gradually redeveloped if they were to independently become active again. And number 3, that they believed that the things they wanted to do or the places they wanted to go to were not accessible to them, even if they did have good confidence and good mobility. So it's these 3 key areas of challenge: confidence, mobility, and accessible opportunities, that we're going to focus on together and discuss together today within the group on this call. Our internal response to the feedback was to work out a project plan. that addressed those three priorities in a person-centred way. We called that the Reconnections Project, and we're now trying to fund the delivery of that across various parts of the UK. That project begins with a conversation, which effectively gives the individual a chance to explain their own particular feelings in respect of those three areas of challenge, and also for them to tell us what their aspirations actually are. That is to say, what they would like to be able to do. We then focus with them for 6 months or so to try to overcome the challenges that are preventing that from happening as things stand. Within our project, the confidence and motivation side of things is dealt with through individual support from a project officer and our multi-tiered emotional support and wellbeing service. The mobility side is covered through the provision of volunteer mobility buddies who will help a person to become active again and to regain their independent use of local transport options. And the accessibility issue revolves around us delivering something that we call the DeafBlind Friendly Initiative, with the venue or the social opportunity that that individual has identified as their preferred objective. That DeafBlind Friendly package is a detailed self-assessment and support package that helps the provider to recognise and implement ways in which they can ensure good service, inclusivity and accessibility for people with sensory loss. So that a brief outline, that's a brief outline of just one project that's designed to meet the needs expressed by people with sensory loss based on what they've told us. But of course, there are many actions that can be undertaken by all of us, which will also help. And it's these small personal acts. They don't need to form part of a volunteer programme or a formal project like the one that I've just described. No, it's just about how a civilised and caring society should automatically operate. And when we discuss together the three key themes in more detail in a few minutes' time, I hope you'll be able to think of ways in which you all can contribute to this important cause. So I'm now going to pass over to Carl for some reflections on what he and the Leeds Hearing and Sight Loss Service have learned from their interactions with local people in the last few months.
Okay, so thanks, Mike. Yeah, so my name is Carl Proud. I work for Leeds Hearing and Sight Loss Service. First thing I'd like to say is the way we were before the pandemic came. So we have a city centre office where we held drop-in sessions for people who were visually impaired, partially sighted, blind, and deaf, and are hard of hearing. And those drop-in sessions allowed people to come in at any time they wanted in our opening hours and gain all kinds of different sorts of support. And the office itself was quite a busy environment where deaf and blind people, and sometimes deaf-blind people, would interact together. And it was pretty chaotic, but that worked for us. People learned to get to our office, find their way to our office and get the support they needed. We had a lot of different members of staff who specialized in different areas, and we had a busy city centre office. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. So at the beginning of the pandemic, everything was moved to online. And across society, there was a sudden rush to move everything to online and to start using all kinds of different platforms to get everybody to still interact and to support people from their homes as they were now unable to actually get out and about. And it's been said that really what we saw there was a kind of a 10-year move to a digital future that only took 3 months. And the way we saw it is that in previous times, we used to talk a lot about the medical model of disability, or the social model of disability. But now we were seeing a form of disability, which was a digital model of disability, where the ability to actually interact with people using technology was now a key part of what support people were able to get and how they were going to engage in that support. There were so many platforms people were using, from Zoom, Google Meet, to Teams, even people still using the old Skype service. And some GPs and local authorities were using bespoke services of online connectivity. And of course, the questions there were all about whether they were accessible to people. Because some of these platforms were better than others when it came to accessibility. So for now, for the last sort of, it seems like for a long time, 18 months, 2 years, there's been a constant attempt to work out which platform is better when using closed captions, subtitling. And different platforms have been tried at different times. And we're still really learning what the best way of getting those accessible formats out there in these platforms. So then the pandemic sort of rolled back a bit, and we realized that we had to start getting people back into service face to face. And then it was a question of working out how people were going to interact with us, how people were going to gain the confidence to come back into service. And when we did that, when we opened up, one of the things that we really noticed is that people appeared again. People appeared again who had been effectively dropped completely out of service. So some people had moved to online and were using it fairly well. Some people moved to online for just emergency things and essential things, but some people just simply didn't engage with us online. And the first thing we noticed is when people came back through our doors, is that they brought in with them the problems, the issues that they'd collected for the previous 18 months. They'd not engaged with us online. And they just brought all these issues that had really piled up. And one of the reasons we found that people had dropped out, either people had not engaged with us from the very beginning, or they dropped out. They simply dropped off a cliff of support during the pandemic because of the fatigue that I think we all felt. You know, we spoke about Zoom fatigue, but when you're trying to fight with the technology and fight with the accessibility issues, there is a real chance that you get a great deal of fatigue in just having to deal with that on a daily basis. And what happened is people simply withdrew from the sources of support. And when we opened up, then the question was, can these people re-engage with us? What would now stop with them re-engaging with us when we are now fundamentally open? So that's the effects we saw. And that's the learning we got from the reopening, which was really quite a shock to see the change in people's circumstances and in their confidence and their environment for when we reopened. So I'll pass back to Mike, I think, at this stage.
Thank you, Carl, for those observations. So we're just going to take a short interpreter break at this point, just for, say, I think 4 minutes will be enough until past. And then when you rejoin us, we'll start to look at the individual key areas of focus separately. So thanks very much. Please rejoin us in 4 minutes' time. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Welcome back. So over the next few sections of today's session, we're going to be focusing on each of the three main themes that we identified earlier in turn. Beginning firstly with the subject of self-confidence. I'm going to hand over to Carl for this, but before I do so, let me just remind you, please, it's really important that you do contribute yourselves once the presenter has said a few initial words, and that we get some useful discussion going. So thanks very much, Carl.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Okay, so I'll keep this quite brief, I think, see if we can get some thoughts from people. I think I'd like to say a few words really about the link between confidence and independence. Independence really for people is a function of practice and confidence. We gain confidence in our own skills, and that leads us to get greater independence through the practice of these moments where we control our environment, where we take control of the environment around us. We sort of increase our mental as well as our physical strength from repeating these actions and being able to gain greater independence as we become better at doing things for ourselves. A good example I use at this stage is a simple process of getting in a car, getting in a taxi or a car when somebody is visually impaired. So most of the time when somebody is visually impaired, standing there with a guide dog or with a white stick, is waiting to actually get in a taxi driver will potentially get out of the car and come round and actually support that visually impaired person to get in the back of a car. Well, now in the back of a car, of course. Previously, we used to be able to get in the front seat of a car. I haven't traveled in the front seat of a car for what seems an awful long time now. But we often, when we're talking to people who are visually impaired, talk about how we discuss how people would like to really do that part of the process themselves, because that small piece of independent action increases their confidence that they can deal with the situation of getting into a car. So rather than waiting for somebody to give them support, they take control of the environment by finding the back of the car they're getting into, find the car door, get in and deal with that whole process. A tiny small thing that most of us take completely for granted can actually be a small win in the life of someone who has a sensory impairment in this case. And doing that means that when you come to the point where a taxi comes, you're able to take that control. And of course, it means that if you do become reliant on taxi drivers or people around you giving you that support, then when that doesn't happen, you can end up becoming lost and losing that confidence. And really what happened with the pandemic is that the worlds that we develop, the worlds that as sensory impaired people we actually create around us, where we know what the world is about, we know what to expect, that got taken away from us. And suddenly there were new ways of interacting with the world around us. We lost really our understanding of what a normal day looks like. From the moment we left the house, there were changes around us. And as sensory impaired people, we found ourselves a lot of the times unsure of what the rules were. The new rules of engagement with people had changed. And because there was a lack of accessible information, for example, using British Sign Language with government press conferences, or whether there were things like now on GP surgeries, we'd have posters indicating that there was now a one-way system. We lost that confidence in the world around us that we'd been able to engage with. Then later on, of course, that we were told that everybody was to take their own responsibility for their own actions. And in some ways that meant that if we had understood the rules that we had to deal with, now we weren't sure what the rules were. Everybody was going to deal with things differently. So there was a massive level of uncertainty in the world around us, and that really affected our confidence, and therefore it affected our independence. And it pushed people into withdrawing into their safe space, which was normally their homes. Because people were worried about getting it wrong. They were worried about being out and about and getting on a bus and not understanding, especially with the increased use of face coverings. And as I'm sure a lot of people know here, that face coverings affect not only those of us who are hard of hearing, but also those of us who are visually impaired. As we suddenly are unable to focus in on the actual lip movements and focus in on the conversation. So we lose that connectivity that we used to have with people around us, where we knew what the deal was, we knew what to expect, and therefore we could just get on with our day quietly without having to constantly interact with people in this sort of new normal. So a lot of the time we felt that there was an increased tension. If we were having to ask for support or asking for information or asking for advice, there seemed to be an increased tension in the air for the people around us. As everybody was trying to do the right thing, walk around each other, keep social distancing, all those kind of rules were in place. There was an increased tension, and we found that really, really difficult to engage with. And again, it pushed us to stay at home. And I think really confidence levels will probably improve, but really they're not going to improve till we actually start to level out with a new normal, so that people can learn to understand what they should expect from the environment, but also what they should expect from the people around them. And in their interactions when they go into shops, when they deal with public transport and the like. And I think that's the point where we're going to probably see confidence levels increase, and therefore independence increase as people start to practice their confidence again and again. So I'd like to open up and say, has anybody got any thoughts on what I've said, and maybe even any ideas on how things could be better?
No hands up.
No hands. That's okay. Well, that's fine. That's no problem at all. Well, hopefully, as we move on, people will have further thoughts.
I was going to say something, Carl. I'm conscious of another of the quotes that we gathered when we were doing that feedback exercise, and it was one gentleman who said, he basically said, I would need support to become more socially active again. He said, I like talking, but people don't always understand me or know how to communicate with me, so they don't bother. It would be good for organisations such as yours to show people how to make them more confident to say hi. And I think that's a very good point. It's not just about the confidence of the people with sensory loss, it's about the confidence of all of us to interact with them.
I think that's true, and I think when we do further training on engaging with people with sensory loss, one of the first things we say is for people have to get over their fear. And we've got used to talking about the fear, during the pandemic, but there's a constant job of work to be done to encourage institutions, organizations to get over their fear of dealing with people with a sensory impairment, of actually doing things like going up, asking questions. It's perfectly okay to go up and ask questions of people and say, ask them about what they're able to see, what they're able to feel, touch, ask them what they're able to hear, so that you can then engage with them much more proactively. So I think it is a real job to get over that kind of fear of interaction.
There are some interesting comments starting to appear in the chat. So Linda, who's actually a colleague of ours and works on our helpline, and so she's regularly talking to people with all sorts of different challenges. And Linda's saying people need to be more respectful of one another and also have patience. And somebody called Emma Hill has kindly responded and says she agrees with Linda, and be more person-centered. those outside of organisations who perhaps don't have the awareness. Not everyone is the same. Asking what does that person need? How can we help or make things easier? And Karen has agreed and says, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Oh, I know who that is,
Yeah.
actually.
I've
read that
good
book
friend,
as well.
Karen.
Yeah, I've read that book as well, Karen.
Emery saying, yes, don't be worried about asking. And Linda is saying, do fact sheets of how people approach and ask someone if they want help and how they can help.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about that, Lynn? Were you saying that fact sheets already exist, or that we ought to, as an action point from this meeting, we ought to think about creating them?
Yeah, maybe. That was something that came up, I think, in one of our meetings a few months ago, that I took from another organisation, and they'd got a fact sheet on how friends and families could help support. So I was thinking of something like that, maybe an action from this meeting, you know, how people can approach someone in the street if they see them with their guide dog maybe, or their white cane, or they're looking a bit lost, or how do they approach, how do they ask them for help?
I think the golden rule is don't be afraid, isn't it? Seize the moment. Don't be afraid. People with sensory loss generally are used to people approaching them and asking them, and they're not afraid or embarrassed about the fact that they have an impairment of some sort, which makes life more fun.
I don't think that the person with the sight or hearing loss is. I think it's not so much myself, but probably the sighted and the hearing people that are afraid of offending, I think, or perhaps afraid of what reaction they might get back. I mean, if I see somebody with a white cane coming towards me, I'll say to my other half, move out of the way, give me a bit of space, you know, something as easy as that sometimes.
Yes. We've got a nice long comment from Marcus. Marcus, I don't know whether you're happy and able to actually speak and just explain that point to the group. If not, I'll read it out.
Hello, I'm not actually called Marcus. My name's Lee, but my son's commandeered my Zoom somehow. No, exactly.
You're both welcome in disguise. That's fine.
I'm not sure how he did that. I was just wondering if it would be useful to advise any deafblind people with sensory impairment, that it's everybody across the board, fully sighted and hearing people too, that have also really struggled with all the new rules, not wanting to get anything wrong, not wanting to accept people, also being quite scared for their own welfare, their family's welfare. Everybody's under so much more stress and pressure with the pandemic. It's made everybody feel quite stressed and anxious and worried about upsetting people. So these feelings are actually quite normal for everybody worldwide, and that deaf-blind people or people with sensory loss are not alone in feeling those. Maybe it wouldn't make them feel quite so stressed and anxious if they could understand, because maybe they can't see that everybody around is very stressed looking and worried, and you know. And I also then thought, actually, some people, I work with sensory people, I work at Peterborough City Council, I'm a sensory support officer, so I do work with sensory impaired people every day, but a more general member of the public might not be able to easily identify a person with sight or hearing loss. And I just wondered if there's any way, maybe an armband or something, that could just clearly show that person who's taken a little bit longer at the front of the queue, there's an actual reason why, so nobody's standing behind them tutting or huffing and puffing or anything like that, making them feel really stressed out. I don't know, it's just ideas, we're just brainstorming, aren't we?
Absolutely, that's the purpose of the session, and thank you so much for your input.
I think that's interesting as well, Mike, because so one of the things I've become really grateful for during the sort of pandemic is I use a long white stick, and it is a really good symbol, and it's the same as like a guide dog can be quite a good symbol, you know, or for deafblind using a white stick with red bands around it. But I think for working with colleagues who are deaf or hard of hearing, around things like face masks, that's been a lot harder because it's not clear at that point of interaction. You're right, it's not clear that there's a need here. So it's that, because that kind of initial part of the conversation seemed to happen again and again. So we'd hear a lot of conversations for our clients who'd say that they would struggle on public transport, having that conversation with a bus driver where they'd be saying, can you take your mask down so I can read your lips, you know? And of course, what it seemed like people were saying is, can you just take your mask off? Which of course isn't really the full extent of what was being asked. But of course, it's different. If I'm walking along, I've got a long white cane, then, you know, people will normally get out of my way. But I think you're right in terms of the comment about also about realizing that everybody else is struggling. One of the things I think I've sort of I've been made aware of is that I obviously have a nightmare at one-way systems at my GP surgery because I've got no idea how to do a one-way system. But of course, you know, my partner has pointed out that everybody else is going wrong in the one-way system as well. You know, and so I'm thinking it's only me and everybody else is completely competent in this new world. But it's quite nice to be pointed out that we're all going out the outdoor, the indoor through the outdoor and all that kind of thing, that actually it's going wrong quite a lot for all of us at times as we try and negotiate things.
Yeah, thank you. I'm conscious of the time moving on. Karen, did you want to say something?
I've just wondered if I could share those
Yes.
documents through Leeds Hearing and Sight Loss Service, because I do have them. So I'll put them in the chat because they're very useful.
Thank you very much. And I'm also conscious of the comment by Socheki, if I've pronounced that correctly, saying creating awareness of dual sensory loss and how people could be helped. Yes, it's something that us and many other organisations are constantly striving to try to do. We have, for instance, DeafBlind awareness sessions that my colleague Andrew conducts. I know Carl does a lot of work around understanding in the local community. I don't know whether you wanted to just expand on that point before we move on, Socheki, if I've got that name correct. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay. Thanks very much. So I think we're due now to take the next of our short breaks. So we'll just have a quick 5-minute break. My clock says 1:47, so we'll say 1:52 if we can reconvene, please. And then we'll look at the next of our key topics. Thank you very much. See you shortly.
Can you hear me, Mike? I think you're still muted.
I
I just added another comment on the type up bit on the chat. Can you see it?
who's shouting at me? Sorry,
Marcus Morgan, but Jenny really.
it's Jenny, isn't it? Sorry, I didn't jot down your name, Jenny. I wasn't sure what you
Comes up as it comes up as Marcus.
Comes up as
Morgan,
Marcus, but it's Jenny. Right. Thank you, Jenny. Are you familiar with Andrew? Have you met Andrew before?
I have had emails from him, I believe. I just
Okay,
need to...
that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we had an ongoing contact with you after
Yep.
this session. That's lovely, because we'd certainly like to keep a relationship alive with you.
Yep.
What am I looking? Oh, 2 new messages. Oh, there we are. Got it. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, we'll bring that up.
Just thinking it'd be raising public awareness, you know, to try and be a bit more patient with people that they maybe don't realise have extra needs. I'm going to put my mic back off, sorry.
That's lovely. No, thank you for your contribution. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for the interaction that you've given so far. That's been really stimulating, and it's one of these where I'm sure we're going to think at the end we'd like to have gone on for another hour or two, but there we are. We need to press on. So just to bring up the chat up to date, there's a very good point made by Jenny, masquerading as Marcus, who is just saying that maybe we should be pushing for some funding, possibly from central government, around campaigns for hidden disability awareness. Bearing in mind this whole International Day of People with Disabilities, the main theme for it this year is hidden disabilities. Obviously, a lot of what we're talking about, we briefly mentioned symbolisms earlier on, such as canes. Carl mentioned canes and other symbols of disability. Not everybody with disability carries a symbol of it, and certainly in the sensory loss world that's also very true. So it's a very valid point, and maybe something for further discussion after today's session around whether or not a unified request for a bit more support around a campaign would be welcome. So thank you for that. I also did stick the contact number for DeafBlind UK in there, 0800 132 320. Apologies for the typo in the original post. That's if anybody would like to speak to. It will be Andrew ultimately regarding a deafblind awareness session, most of which are done online and take approximately an hour if you have colleagues who would benefit from that. Exemption badges are mentioned. My section, which is meant to be the current section, is about mobility. So I think a lot of these sorts of issues around masks and so on does come in into that anyway. So I'll crack on with the mobility section, and we'll come to some of those other points in a moment. So mobility, or the lack of it, let's just think about that for a moment. As I mentioned earlier, from our informal conversations, we've heard that many of our beneficiaries are telling us that their fitness had decreased considerably during the pandemic. And we also need to bear in mind things such as that even in good times, people with a hearing loss often have balance issues as well. So that's another additional challenge. And when you couple these sorts of challenges with being inactive for a period of time, obviously it can create problems that are difficult for people to overcome. I did quote earlier that worrying statistic that 64% of our respondents to the survey told us that they had no motivation for engaging with anything active. 36% of all of those people we consulted said that they would welcome some help to become more physically active again. And a quarter of all those that we contacted said that they would just love to be able to go even just for a regular short walk and a bit of fresh air. So a quarter of all of those people who responded were missing not just being able to get outside of their front doors and have some fresh air and a bit of gentle exercise. So also we need to remember that beyond the physical mobility challenge, there are also some practical and psychological issues that re-engaging with our community might be requiring. One gentleman told us, and I'm just reading this quote directly, he said, "It has taken a while for me to feel up to heading back out again. So much has changed," and Carl touched on this earlier. "So much has changed in the community since last year. I'm not sure how to navigate it anymore." So it's an important point to remember about mobility. It's not just about physical capability. It's also about the ability to navigate, to find your way, and to make use of transportation options. So let's just have a wider discussion around some of these challenges. I'm going to go back to the one that was in the chat around somewhere. Apologies. Okay, well, there's a few more things appeared while I've been talking, I think. Come back to those shortly. Okay, I mean, let's talk about the physical side first. I mean, I would hope you would agree that sort of localized starting points, such as a gentle stroll around the block and so on, are the essential beginnings to somebody regaining their capability for being actively independent again. So, I mean, what do we think as a group? Are there things that we as individuals can do to help people become just more active? I mean, the obvious suggestion is that we all sort of rack our brains and think of friends and neighbours and family who are maybe not as active as they are, but would welcome, a friendly arm to help them just take a short stroll once a week or something like that. I mean, that seems sort of logical, community-based, general sort of welfare, doesn't it? Sorry, Marcus, it's Jenny has got her hand up. Jenny, did you want to come in?
Yes, hello. Sorry, I forgot to put my camera on before. I'm not used to doing the camera side. I just typed up a note just saying, is there a way for one of the organisations to, over the next year or so, start doing some kind of home visit scheme for clients, where it would literally involve strength and balance training, indoor mobility practice, outdoor mobility practice, including going around the block, like you're saying, getting in and out of a car, because the person who visits would have probably arrived in a car, to keep going with those skills so as they don't lose their confidence. And then I was just thinking, what about asking the neighbours and community to see if there's a volunteer scheme you can get going as well. But this could all tie in, the community side of everything could kind of all tie in with an advertisement campaign, trying to get people to help other people and think of other people, I suppose. Yeah,
indeed. The walking one is an interesting one. When I was researching what was already available, when we first had that project idea that I described earlier, which included the sort of the mobility buddies idea, I had a look to see whether there were existing organisations who could support that sort of an idea. And the answer was no, not really, I'm afraid to say. The obvious ones you think of with walking are things like the Ramblers Association and even sort of U3A walking groups and so on. But there appeared to be a gap. And it was the gap between the people who were not mobile and therefore sort of restricted to what you might call armchair exercises, and those who were able to join something like a rambling group or something, but the expectation was that they would be able to probably walk at least a mile in those organised walks. And of course, they also had to get to where the walk started from. The deficit was for people starting from their own front doorsteps. Carl, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was just gonna sort of like, I suppose, like reinforce what you were saying, that where I've been looking at something similar, and I've got connections with a number of people who run mental health walks for people with mental health issues, and they're fantastic. They're absolutely fantastic, and they're very good at being able to look at the different sorts of walks, you know, whether they've got sort of like hills, whether they involve any steps, that kind of thing. And they tend to be along you know, not urban environments completely like pavements, but they'll be on parks. There's a park in Leeds called Roundhay Park with big wide open pathways. But the problem actually is getting to that initial starting point.
Yes.
That's really, you know, or you can I've come across a number of sensory walks where the walk itself will have some interesting things, but of course, again, the problem is getting people to the starting point. I think that's really the limiting factor.
Absolutely, that was my findings also, Carl. So really, we do need to come up with solutions, I think, that start at the individual's own front door. I don't know whether anybody has any suggestions or even any experience of something that is already in place in the part of the world that they live in that addresses that in some way. Karen?
I've just put a bit of a rambling comment in the chat, which brought a few things together. So the organisation I work for, we represent the third sector and voluntary organisations in the city, and there's lots of small grant funds and there's lots of organisations doing amazing things, but it's really difficult actually for organisations to find sustainable long-term funding for activities like walking groups, which we know have a huge impact on people's well-being and keeping people connected. And it's such a shame because you know, you sit in and you listen to conversations like this. We all know that long-term sustainable funding for a group that's preventative and keeps people connected and well would be great. But we do struggle with that, and I suppose it was just a reflection from my perspective about how you know, in Leeds in particular, we work so closely with commissioners and funders, always reminding people about the benefit of the community services and just how important it is to fund them properly.
I'm just wondering whether anybody on the call who represents another local authority would like to comment on that at all. If not, I'm afraid I'm going to pick on my old friend Gary in South Wales, who's there. I don't know whether you're actually with us, Gary. I noticed yourself in the attendance list there. Are you with us, Gary? He may just not be at his desk or taking a phone call. Okay. Is there anybody else from a local authority perspective who wanted to comment on that? About whether or not, you know, it was felt that more provision for that sort of home, immediately from the home activity or exercise was something that ought to be pushed for becoming part of a long-term plan and a long-term expectation. Andrew, your hand's up. Can't hear you, my friend. Not really.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, you can hear me now. Brilliant. Right. Knew that was going to work. So I was just going to come in on a slightly different point from what you were just saying. Could someone in the chat at Hazel was actually talking about there needs to be a clarification to members of the public and as well the people that we support about what hidden disability mean, and also how the impact of identifying individuals with sensory impairment, because it might be that there are a lot of people out there that have a sensory impairment, whether that be a single or a dual sensory impairment, that might not be aware of the support that's out there, or they might not know what hidden disability means and what the full impact of that. And I think that sort of also comes in with the kind of ability side of things, because some people might just be saying, oh well, I don't get out as much because I'm sort of getting older, rather than thinking that actually it's to do with their confidence with hearing or their confidence with their sight loss. And that was just a point I wanted to bring in from the chat feature as well.
Thank you very much. I see that Gary did respond to me. He's just on the duty call, I believe. So we might bring Gary in due course when he's ready. So that's fine. I'm keeping an eye on the time. When am I meant to round this one up? 2:05. There we are, about now. So thank you again for your input into that section. I'm trying to make some notes and so on for things that we need to remember. So we will have a bit of a documentary evidence of things that we all felt were good ideas. So I'll just call a quick break now, and then for the final session after the break, Andrew is going to be focusing on the third of our key topics, which is the accessible opportunities. So if you could rejoin us in about, let's keep it slightly briefer, let's say 11 minutes past the hour, please. That would be great. Thank you very much. Okay, everybody, how are we doing? I think that's the allotted time for restart. Thank you very much. So before I pass over to Andrew, I see that Gary, who I picked on a moment ago, is available again. Gary, are you able to field a question?
Hi, mate. Yeah, of course. How can I help?
Sorry to pick on you, my friend.
That's okay.
I just know with all of your experience, it would be nice to hear any thoughts from the perspective of a local authority in another part of the UK.
Hopefully.
In terms of any feelings around whether or not that sort of initial mobility issue is something that local authorities could or should be looking at.
Well, can you recap?
Sorry. Yes, you need a recap, don't you?
Yeah, I was.
Yes, I beg your pardon. Yes, I beg your pardon. No, we were just saying earlier that one of the problems we've found when researching what's available to help people become mobile again is there's a sort of a deficit from the perspective of them actually just getting out and about a few steps, going around the block on a regular basis, as opposed to things that are more like sort of walking projects or programs, which are a longer walk and you have to get there in the first place in order to start the walk. So just in terms of increasing mobility from the perspective of somebody's front doorstep, whether or not there's ideas or suggestions doing the rounds around how we can promote that in some way from the local authorities' point of view, to help people become more active and then hopefully less reliant on other services and the health service and so on.
Yeah, if I'm honest, there isn't a lot going on focusing on that, but it's definitely something we're aware of that's needed, because a lot of things, the specialist one-to-one support services like com guides and interveners can pick up some of that work if they're already working with somebody. But if somebody hasn't been identified yet, or and that's the kind of thing they might need now. I mean, chatting to you a little while ago, it was quite apparent that, as we've been discussing in this kind of forum, deafblind people are struggling more than most, and getting back out and about and starting to rebuild confidence and physical strength and motion and get out walking and things isn't really something that I don't think anyone's looked at in any great detail. So it's definitely a gap, but something I think if you chatted to sensory teams, they'd say they were aware of it, and they'd like to try to do something. At the moment, we're still not able to work in that way, and the com guides and things that are supporting us still aren't able to work in the way that they want. So putting in a service like that at the moment is still difficult, unfortunately. But
yeah, brilliant. Many thanks for your perspective on that, Gary. You're right in saying it's a wider issue than just the sensory loss community anyway. It's about people in general, isn't it, and needing a bit of a boost in mobility, myself included, by the way. So thanks very much. We'll move on to the third section now, which Andrew's going to lead on, which is regarding accessible, sorry for that thing going off in the background, about accessible opportunities. Thank you, Andrew.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. Just got the document in the wrong place. Thank you very much for that, Mike. And this is the third and final segment, and we'll try and finish on time at 2:30. We're just wanting to be discussing sort of accessible opportunities post COVID-19. I'd just like to say thank you so much for all of your comments and discussion points so far. It's been really, really interesting. As we're all aware, COVID has caused disruption to many things such as social group, partnership opportunities, and numerous events and projects. In the original lockdown and subsequent lockdown that followed, the main objective of the third sector became ensuring that many services use. Hang on, let me start again. The main objectives of the third sector organisations became ensuring that the many service users, clients, customers and members that they supported were receiving that necessary continued support throughout the lockdown, whether this be contacting people on a regular basis to ensure that they're sort of getting mental health support, or just having a chat, or doing shopping for essential supplies for vulnerable members of the community. It's definitely been some difficult years for a lot of people, and as we approach the second anniversary of the original lockdown and a potential lockdown in the next couple of days, it is time to look for the future and see what we can do. So in this session, I'd like us to discuss the opportunities that are out there to support the communities that we work with. Of course, from our point of view, we're mainly looking at services available for people with dual sensory loss, but sensory loss is something that spans across the whole community and impacts different groups, and it impacts everyone and anyone. So looking for a diverse range of services to meet the needs of diverse communities that we all support is a key component of what we do and strive for. As we've heard from both Mike and Carl, there are a multitude of potential issues that people with sensory impairment may face when accessing the world post-COVID. In this section, I want to spend a bit of time of hearing your thoughts and discussing any potential ideas that we can think of that might make life easier for those with sensory impairment. What sort of ideas have you all got floating around? This is a chance to share good ideas and good working practice that we could all adopt to help provide a more consistently accessible world across all aspects of life, whether it's accessing statutory services, non-statutory services, or leisure services. We want to make it so that any activity or resource is accessible for people with sensory loss. COVID has presented us with an opportunity in a way to review and reshape some of our services, and we all have a chance to enhance whatever offer we make for sensory loss community and other disabilities in mind. So this is a chance to maybe talk about any ideas that you've got. What opportunities do you think are available, or what opportunities do you think that we need to look at to make available for the community that we support? I don't know if anyone would like to make a comment. I'm just gonna doing all sorts of things with my screen at the moment. Sorry. There we go. Anyone want to start off? So obviously, I mean, I suppose part of it is making existing services that we've got accessible, and sort of redesigning them to make sure that they're accessible, particularly with sort of COVID restrictions in mind. So one example would, be social groups, face-to-face social groups, and returning those to a state of new normal, ensuring that they're accessible, but as well as being safe. Anyone else want to add on? Long and quiet.
Carl. Yeah, Carl.
Yeah, just something that I've been thinking a lot of in terms of our social groups is really to try and engage in much more with the local community. And for us, it's a city community. So when we tend to talk about local communities, we tend to talk about certain types of communities, but what we're trying to do is with decent public transport routes into the city, trying to arrange for people to see if they feel comfortable to do things like go to local coffee shops. I know Andrew and I have spoke about this pre-pandemic, which seems just like an age ago now, about how engaging in this sort of like in what you might sort of call the normal world around us, as opposed to necessarily always going for a kind of bespoke social group, in a church hall or something like that. Not to criticize those things, but actually sometimes it's quite good to actually have that. I think it's good for people's independence and confidence to actually engage in the slightly more chaotic environment of the city. That we work in a city, so that's obviously where we work. I think that has a lot of benefits that we sometimes as institutions we can sometimes shy away from. And I'd like to see us do more of that, of actually getting out there where people actually where other people are actually living and working. Yeah.
So within the community, more than sort of separate. Yeah, no, thank you for that, Carl. Jenny, Morgan, I know you've got your hand up. You on mute, Jenny?
I've just realised you can't hear me. Sorry. Yeah, so while we're not locked down, I was thinking face-to-face social groups, but maybe smaller groups, have a limit on the number of people, but put on more groups per week. So everybody gets the opportunity to attend the groups, but smaller, so you can socially distance and everybody still gets out and about. I'm more hearing impairment from my side work, and I know that the Cambridgeshire Deaf Association have started up their community groups again. So they do their own, like a coffee morning in the park in one day a week. They do a drop-in session at Paston and Gunthorpe Community Group on another day of the week. They do a pub meetup. I think it's all changed since before COVID. They're different venues, but the deaf community, the news gets around really fast and then everybody flocks to where they need to meet up, but everybody's used to all the social distancing, washing your hands, wearing face masks rules now. So yeah, but I would say smaller groups. So still do your groups, but make them smaller but more regular to make sure everybody can be involved. I've already mentioned about the home visits for if this Omicron variant takes off and in the new year, hopefully we'll get through Christmas first, but if in the new year they decide to try and lock us back down again for our own good, then perhaps a home visit service would be the way to go, because people will be getting quite desperate by then, because it's like having the rug pulled out from under them again. We've got a bit of freedom. And then if we have to get back locked down again, it'd be nice to have a contingency plan in place to support people, if you see what I mean. Anyway, I know one last thing before I forget. Also, it would be nice to definitely make sure that our sensory impaired clients feel empowered and know their rights, their deaf-blind rights, their deaf rights, their blind rights, to ask for support from adult social care. If there's a risk to safety, risk of isolation, if they could be a bit more empowered by the organisations and people supporting them and know their rights and know that they've got a right to ask for support, and then hopefully they will put themselves forward and ask for the support that they need. And if they don't think they're getting the support that they need, maybe they could be empowered to raise a complaint and push things forward a bit. I'm sure there's advocacy services in all your organisations. So I just wanted to say that as well. I'm going to put myself back on mute again now.
No. Thank you very much for that. And I've just seen there is a comment that has come into the chat about COVID passports and sort of, are they a way in which we can help support the sensory community to get back out there? I personally, from my point of view, it's very unclear about sort of what COVID passports are and how they work. And I know that there are a lot of scams going around saying that, you know, if you click on this link you can get a COVID passport and things like that. I think a member of my family has fallen victim to that, unfortunately. So that is a very good, interesting point. Just to follow on from what Jenny was saying, part of, I think, what I want to discuss about is the sort of diverse opportunities available, because social groups are absolutely fantastic, and for a lot of people they are a lifeline, but they don't work for everyone. And I think this is, as Carl was saying before, me and Carl were meeting before the pandemic to look at sort of setting up a social group in a cafe, because we wanted to appeal to a different age bracket of people with sensory impairment, because we knew that there were social groups in Leeds for people with dual sensory loss, but the vast majority of the attendees were all of a certain age bracket and didn't appeal to the wider age range that we all support. So that's partly why we were looking at that. But also, not everyone wanted to go and sit and talk about, you know, well, whatever topic. So I know that we've, in our discussion in our organisation, we did look at the beginning of the pandemic about sort of different kinds of activities. One example being beekeeping or something like that, and seeing if we can open that up to the sensory loss community to see, could be, you know, we all have different hobbies and different things that we like to do, and sometimes when having a sensory impairment you think that you cannot do those activities because of your sensory impairment, whereas we want to look at the opportunities of saying, well, maybe we can incorporate in the local beekeeping community an opening for people with sensory loss to enjoy the beekeeping thing, because it is something that can be done. Does anyone have any other ideas of sort of activities that might want to appeal to the sensory loss community? I know Mike wanted to say something earlier. Mike wants to come in now.
Well, only very quickly, I was going to say, yes, absolutely taking your point, Andrew. But obviously, in the long term, what we're really wanting to see is that the whole community is accessible. And so, you know, actually, the need for niche groups and so on should become unnecessary at some point in a golden future, because anybody with sensory loss thinks the same way as somebody without sensory loss, that all of those things that are happening are potentially open to them and can just go and involve themselves. So that's where we need the support of people who are running other opportunities, whether those are sort of retail opportunities, leisure opportunities, social things, faith things, whatever is actually happening in any given community. If all of those things have made themselves accessible, then job is done. So it, you know, we as organizations help those organizations and those service providers and those leisure opportunities to become accessible, but the will for that needs to come from those venues themselves. And you know, I don't know the people on the call today who are responsible for services or provision of some sort, or you know, a shop or a care home or whatever it might be, you know, the will to make that transition to general accessibility needs to come from within, from them, which is really important, and why we appeal to them to make contact with us so we can help them along that journey. Jenny's back in, I think. Is she with a quick comment?
I was just going to say, Mike, after a couple of people have put their hands up, do you mind if I go to them?
Absolutely, no problem.
Hazel, I know you put your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, Mike. There are lots of, I work for the London Borough of Merton, and although there's lots of resources out there for people with learning disabilities, for elderly people. We do have an agency who work with visually impaired people as well, and there's lots of social things going on there. But for people who are hard of hearing or deaf, I have to admit that it's seriously lacking. And I really wish that some of these organisations would think about other, as I call it, the hidden disability, because that's what it is. This is where I'm getting, you know, coming from, this hidden disability. So, you know, that's where we need to start. Lots of councils have lots of things going on, charity agencies, clubs, organisations, all to do with, you know, every sort of ethnic or community background. But if there's a hearing impairment involved, there's not going to be accessibility at all. And that's where the block is for a lot of councils and county councils. So yeah, that I completely agree with you, Mike. And that's where I'd like help.
There's a long journey of travel ahead of us, I'm afraid, on this. But, you know, unless we sort of state the case and start somewhere, it's never going to happen, isn't it, Hazel? And thank you for your comments on that. And please do maybe just drop your email address in the chat and we can have a conversation again about it in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm conscious of time, Andrew, and I'm aware that other people might have things to go to. So was there anybody you specifically wanted to bring in at this stage, Andrew, before we wrap it up?
No, I think that was everyone. I just noticed that a few people had their hands up, but I think that's it. If you want to wrap it up, that's absolutely
Does anybody
fine.
want to make a final comment? Any of the people with a hand up?
Karen?
I've been so busy engaging in the discussions that I've forgotten my role as host, and I need to share with you the feedback form. But I think I might have to do it post event, so I'll do it via Eventbrite if that's okay. But if anybody does have any comments.
There was a question from Jenny earlier in the chat about where the recording would be available, because there was somebody who couldn't attend who would like to have been here.
So somebody else asked about the notes as well. We hadn't planned on taking notes, and we hadn't planned on sharing the recording either. It was just for James's purposes, for his educational evidence. So it's entirely up to everyone in the room, really, as to whether you'd be comfortable with us sharing this with those who were unable to attend.
please put a note in the chat if you're not happy with that, anybody, and if nothing appears, then we'll assume that it's okay with everybody.
Well, and then we will send you the Google form, but any kind of comment feedback is useful as well. So please do just let us know what you think about the session and the wider programme, and please do get involved in other things that are happening as well.
Excellent. So Andrew, are you just going to, we're going to put the contact details again in the chat at the end? Yeah. So if anybody would like to take this conversation further with any of us, please just come through on any of those contact details. That helpline number I actually issued earlier, the 0800 132 320, is a perfectly good place to start. The email equivalent of that is info@DeafBlind, which is all one word, 9 letters long, deafblind.org.uk. Or you can go through our website and you'll find those contacts. And then obviously if it's a question for Carl, we're happy to pass it on to him. So thank you for that, everybody. I'm most grateful to you for your input today. As with all these discussions, you always wonder whether it's going to be a tumbleweed moment. It wasn't, and I'm most grateful to you for all your thoughts and ideas. Clearly, it's a far bigger subject than we can pack into an hour and a half. But at least once we've got people interested in talking, it's not going to fall off the agenda. So thanks so much for your input. And then obviously on your feedback forms, I don't know, Karen, is there somewhere to say if people want to kind of continue the conversation in some way or anything like that?
We can encourage people to get in direct contact with yourselves if you like, and make sure that we share both organisations' contact details.
Absolutely fine.
Then if anybody represents an organisation and works in Leeds, then they can connect with us at Forum Central. So we'll send a follow-up message on Eventbrite.
I mean, if people on this call today would like to continue this debate or have a 6-monthly meeting or something like that, we'd be more than happy to set that up in the future. And you just need to let us know through the links that you'd like that to happen, and I'm sure we can do it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody. Good luck with everything.
Thanks a lot.
Keep in touch. Cheerio.
I'm just not quite closing it until I've captured all the chat. So please do
thank you.
Individually leave, and then I'll close it when I've got all that.
Oh, thanks, Karen. That answered that question for me. That's great.
People keep adding things at the end, which is nice. So I'll hold on a little bit.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That's a really good session. I almost, like I said, forgot my role there a little bit.
It's